And I think that kind of helped us do the same thing. And it's also one of those things that we realized when something's really needed to be made, it works out, and it worked out really well for us. And so I think I'm just really grateful for the last 2 years. It's streamed, over 200 times throughout the United States. And that was just, I thought maybe 50 people would watch it if we put it on YouTube. And so it's been really crazy to see all of that go and just be kind of part of that wave and helping continue this conversation and hopefully lead to some change.
Hello, She Amen Black Horse Session. She National Touching Bashin, Sitnajuni Dashachedo, She National. I came here from Phoenix. I'm very happy to be here in Pueblo territory. I am also happy to see and James and John as well. This issue has really followed me for many years. It's been a very tough, I guess, last 10 years. And when we started the case, I think I was 24 years old. So I kind of grew up with this in my life. And just recently, the case has come to a close. After about 11 years of litigation, the case is no longer. So, it's been, the last year has been sort of a mourning period for me to kind of like lay it to rest and just reflect on that and then kind of move forward. So as a new spring comes, that's what I hope that it brings for me. So I don't know why I'm emotional about everything. It's weird. But it's really neat to see this documentary because it's the only documentary out there that is about this issue. And I'm glad that it's done by John and his brother. So, sorry, I don't know why I'm like so emotional right now. This is so weird. So it's really nice to see this work. Just recently, James and I participated in another documentary about this issue as well. It's a non-native person, Kevin Blackistone, who is a journalist with, is it the Washington Post? Yeah. Oh, he's a professor. Great guy. And so that should be rolling out probably in the next year or so, I'm thinking. But it's really neat to know that John and Ken, were the first to do this. And I've been very grateful to be able to go around the nation and talk about this. And because it has done a lot, it has educated people. And a lot of the times people, they just don't know. And to be able to see it on screen, I think it's, it's another thing. To actually read about it and hear about it is one thing, and then actually seeing it on screen is another. So I'm just happy to be here to talk about it, and I'm here for questions. And right now we have worked on some advocacy efforts, especially in DC. The owner of the Washington team is trying to move the stadium, because right now it's in, and it has been in Maryland. They're trying to move it back to DC, and they're trying to do it in very sneaky and underhanded ways, like adding a rider into an appropriations bill in Congress. I don't even want to know who's putting money in whose pocket or whatever. And so we're aware of these things. And the DC Council right now in Washington, DC is opposed to the team coming back to DC with their slurring. So we do have a lot of support out there. There are a lot of people who understand this and they know our struggle, and they've heard us. Right now the Washington team is at an all-time low. They haven't won a Super Bowl since 1992. The morale is low. There's not a lot of fans who attend the games, and I think people understand it. It's just really hard because one man, has that much power. One man, Dan Snyder, has so much power with his white privilege. Sitting in his ivory tower, he doesn't have to listen to anyone because his money, it has that much power. So anyway, I'm rambling. But thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be a part of this. My name is James Wrightington. I'm a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, and I've been engaged in this struggle against racism for many, many years now. As Nick said, I guess I'm an elder. I kind of hate to admit it at times, but my heart is still young in the struggle because many of the issues we're fighting now have been with us forever, and they're not going to go away anytime soon because of the racialized history of this country. Much of my scholarship when I started writing as an undergraduate and a graduate and then a PhD student dealt with issues of race, and a lot of it had to do with the racism I experienced in classrooms, hearing teachers talk about Indians as being savages, and using code words oftentimes to do so. And that attitude is still with us, even though we're getting more and more scholars, and I'm very empowered by the strength I'm seeing in our young scholars coming up, Nick, and our activists, our filmmakers, our future scholar, and others of you in the audience. You know, it's going to be up to you guys to carry on this fight, because, you know, we've set the stage for these battles, and you have to keep it going. Other than that, you know, conditions aren't going to improve very much, or they're going to improve slowly, or even go back. And I often think, you know, about Nazi Germany. And Nazi Germany was once and still is, you know, one of the most highly educated peoples of the world. But that doesn't mean they're not exempt from committing genocide. And that happened during the Second World War. And this country has committed it here as well. So, you know, that's something that's always in the back of my mind, is that we have to be prepared for these situations, and that we have to use the white man's tools to fight his own battles. So that's why education is so important, and we have to be able to change the intellectual structure of this country, these school systems, so that they'll be more responsive to what it means to be a white racist. And the issue that is really important now is that the blackface issue facing the governor of Virginia. So much outrage is being expressed towards him. Well, where's all those expressions about red-facedness that is going on all the time right there in D.C.? And so I wonder how many of those people who are speaking out against that governor also are supporting us in our struggles against these racist mascots. You know, how many of those people we saw in the film talk about how honored they are to have the R word as their team name for Washington? How many of them would be honored to have a blackface image on their football helmets? So it's an issue that is of extreme importance. I was actually an expert witness in the Black Horse case too, and I had a few months to write it. And some of the themes discussed in this video I talked about Indian opposition back in the 70s, and that meeting with the manager of the football team by members of the American Indian Movement, National Congress of American Indians, Americans for Economic Opportunity, LaDonna Harris, National Indian Youth Council, the Native Press Association, we're all there. So these issues have been articulated over and over again, and at some point we're going to make more headway. So it's just a matter of perseverance, and you young people speaking up, and even write. Don't be afraid to write about racism in your scholarship. You know, I started doing it as an undergraduate, facing possible low grades from professors, which had happened, being challenged by professors, saying that you know, that the Indians you know, weren't the way you project them to be. So, you know, my view is, how do you know? You know, you come from a different culture. But anyways, I'll end there, and we'll see where we go from here.
I have a question. It's kind of a statement and a story. Try not to be an Indian man with a microphone and go on too long, but Lakota man with a microphone. So last Sunday I was watching the Super Bowl with some friends of mine at the School for Advanced Research, where I currently live with my partner. And after the Super Bowl, we were just, you know, I was just there eating food. I like to make little smokies and sliders and stuff. It's more of a hanging out with friends kind of thing, and not really cheering against the Patriots. But anyways, after we were finished, we were cleaning up, and we found this little album on this photo album that was sitting on the coffee table. And so for those of you that don't know, the School for Advanced Research is a place for anthropologists who go and get fellowships and write their books, and it's produced top scholars in our field. It has this kind of reputation as like an indigenous kind of centered research center, right? And so there's a lot of quirky things in SAR, and so I was like, oh, I wonder what's in this photo book, and I opened it up, and the first page I opened it up was a photo of the founders of SAR, all dressed up, playing Indian, dressed up like Pueblo people. And this is just casually sitting in this, this billiards room with all these pictures of all these famous Native scholars, such as Dr. Jennifer Dennedale, and all of our heroes, and and Pueblo and Navajo studies. And I was just thinking, like, how pervasive, this playing Indian is in our society. And I used to be one of those guys who were like, oh, mascots, there's more important things to worry about. And I remember when Amanda actually came to town, we had invited her to give a speech at our first ever Indigenous Peoples Day back in 2015. And she started talking about the murders of Cowboy and Rabbit, Key Thompson and Allison Gorman, two Navajo relatives who were killed on the west side of town. And I remember that speech because it clicked for me at that moment in time. You were talking about the ways in which Indigenous peoples are made into cartoonish mascots who can be played with. They're like playthings. And for those of you that don't know, Allison Gorman and Key Thompson, they weren't homeless. They gave their apartment up that night for a family, a Navajo family that was visiting in town, and they decided to sleep on the street. And three young men decided that they literally treated them like playthings. And that's what you said. They did. It was for sport, and even in their testimonies afterwards, they mutilated the bodies so bad that they were beyond recognition, right? And so for me, when I hear these things about playing Indian, it's not innocent, like what James had just said. Dr. Wrightingham just said, it's a celebration of genocide. When we saw our Lakshmi Nathan Phillips at the steps of the Lincoln Monument, what were those MAGA boys doing? Tomahawk chops, right? So this isn't deeply ingrained, and I just wanted to ask each of our panelists to kind of reflect on that and why Dr. Wrightingham was gesturing towards this, why it's important to have movies like this in our curriculum as Native educators, and also Native educators who teach non-Native people. That these things aren't just symbolic acts of violence, that they're related to material forms of violence.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points, and I think one of the things I like to point out in the film, because a lot of people, we made this scene with Ian and Josh, the two white guys in the film, and that was really, when we were making it and thinking the concept of what we were going to do, that was kind of a minor scene in the film that almost didn't make it in there. But then I have so many people afterwards that will come up and say that that's their favorite scene in the entire film. And so, but the hard part about that is we only had about 7 to 8 minutes in that part, but what we're missing out is the context of when I first met Ian, he told me the story of the very first time that he heard and thought about, maybe we shouldn't say this. I think that was around 87, so about 30 years ago. And then about 5-10 years later, he has a Native friend in high school who says, oh yeah, you shouldn't, I can't cheer for the Redskins, that's racist. Actually said that to him, and he kind of just wrote it off. That's 5 years later. 5 years later, he starts reading kind of about the Black Horse case, or actually I think it would have been Suzanne's case in the mid-90s. And then also kind of reading about the Black Horse case when it came through. And it took him about 15 to 20 years for it to finally click, for him to finally realize how problematic and racist this was. And it's one of those things that that's so ingrained in our society. People are so used to seeing those images of Native people that they can't overcome it. And so on one hand, it's really hard because you have to be really patient. It's hard to have patience for someone like Ian for 15 to 20 years. The cool part about I've gotten to travel so much, I actually got to meet the Native friend that Ian was talking about in high school. He's like, yeah, I told that idiot all the time in high school that he needed to change the name, or we needed to change the name, and so it was cool to actually hear his perspective. But I could tell he had been frustrated that he had to, it took him so long to get it. And so I think that's one of the things as educators is you have to be patient. Patient is the key element on it, but it's also tough because there's people that are just blatantly racist and just obviously don't care. And so I think Ian wasn't really one of those, but he was kind of one in the middle, and I think that's one of the reasons that we made the film. So we tried to make it from an educational angle where it's not so much in your face, but it's kind of just giving people the option to figure it out on their own. And I think that's kind of what we have to do as educators in here. I also think at some points there's time for people to scream at you if that's not going to work and if you're going to be blatantly, but there's different tactics at all these things, but I think that's the angle that me and my brother are going at, and I think having those deep conversations with Ian was one of those things that really made me realize that.
So the pervasiveness, I think, of this issue is, I think, deeply ingrained in this country, you know, in everything that we do. And just earlier I was remembering how UNM students abolished the seal here at the university, and kind of watching that from afar. You know, we see all these symbols everywhere, and you know, no one really questions it. I think until we have this awareness about what colonization is and its effects on our people, we begin to really see things for what they are. I think one of the biggest things that I think has been really difficult is like working with our own people too. For me, you know, I kind of came into my sort of awakening when I was in college, because I went to school, my elementary, high school, I thought Christopher Columbus discovered America. I mean, like, it's so deeply ingrained in our educational system that we believe as Native people, as Indigenous people, we believe these things. We believe these lies that have been fed to us. And we truly do believe it until we're told otherwise. And it wasn't until I went to Haskell Indian Nations University, you know, I had to go to another state to get this education from Native professors and read and learn about the true history of our country, of this country, not just Native history, but this country's history. And so, as I mentioned in the film, I think it's, you know, it's a psychological process for us as Indigenous people, and I think we should be allowed the time we should be able to take our time. You know, people are like, well, what about those Native schools out there that have Native mascots? Well, yeah, of course that exists, because we believe these things as well. So yes, we should be able to have that time, you know, on I call our Indian time, to realize these things, educate ourselves, go through that psychological process, decolonization process, in order to make change happen. But there's absolutely no reason why there should be a team called the Washington Redskins. No reason why. That's unquestionable. That absolutely needs to go. And that goes for every other educational institution out there that does not have a majority of its student base as Native students. And so we have to keep challenging. And John, you're right. I think there's people out there who need the education, and there's some people out there who need to be confronted, because they're doing something wrong, they know they're doing something wrong. And we have to confront them, and we have to let them know that it's not okay. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to yell. It's okay, you know, we don't always have to take the higher ground as Native people. You know, we can express ourselves. We've earned that right.
Several thoughts come to mind. When I started working with repatriation in the 1980s, we were told by these people in museums that you guys got better, more important things to worry about, like the poverty your people are facing, the alcoholism in your communities, your unemployment rates. So that's true, but maybe have you ever thought about your work contributes to these problems? So, you know, we have to be able to contextualize these issues on our own terms and challenge these white dominant power structures that promote the inequalities. These systems are based upon what Amanda said a while ago as white privilege. So that is a hard obstacle to overcome. When you begin to enter their territory, they begin to feel like they're the victims. Several months ago, I was asked to write a article, actually it's a question and answer interview for issue now about the mascot issue, and they posed questions. So one of the questions was, what was the sources of this issue? I related to racism, and then I talked about different issues related to that, and then after that was published, ASU Now said it would no longer use the R word in its outlet. So you know, by education we can make a difference, but you know, we have to be willing to persevere and even take our lumps for it. One of my former colleagues in the School of Justice Studies wrote me an email and said, I had a lot of you-know-what to stand up to say these things. And he was not a friend of mine when I was in Justice Studies, by the way, but he acknowledged that it did have an impact. So, you know, we go on and on with our struggles. So keep strong, keep vigilant, and empower yourself with knowledge.
So we have time for a couple of questions. And I'll ask if you focus your questions to the movie or the film or on the issue of Native mascots.
Hello. So the question I have is related to something Amanda just mentioned of Native people growing up and being fed these ideas of the history of the U.S., Christopher Columbus and these types of things. And I'm wondering what your opinion is as to if this type of information plays into schools, Native schools where Native people go, where they use these similar types of mascots like braves and things like that. And what are your thoughts on that? Should those be changed? Is it okay because Native people go there, or what are your thoughts?
So I'm an advocate of all Native mascots should go. It doesn't matter if it's Native school or not. I mean, we went to Haskell Indian Nations University, and as my, in my undergraduate, and they're called the Indians, the Fighting Indians. And I think it should go. You know, there are a lot of alumni who are kind of hanging on to it and saying it's tradition. And yeah, we don't have a mascot that runs around and does flips and all these crazy things. But I just think that having the name, Indians, it just perpetuates stereotypes. It doesn't matter. You could have, the Braves, right? Or you can have a tomahawk or even a feather, and people are going to take from that. And that image, the imagery, and stereotypes of Native people is just so popular, in this country. I think this country, non-Natives, like to take that on as their own pseudo-identity of like, this is who I am, this is where I come from too, because I'm an American, and this is a part of my culture, And it's so prevalent, and it's a billion-dollar industry. I mean, there's so much money to be made with appropriating Native culture. So I think it should go completely. But when I meant, like, Native people, we should be allowed to work on these issues on our own time, and we should be allowed to address these within our community. That's what I believe. But it needs to happen sooner than later, absolutely. It's just so prevalent,
That's a great question, Samuel, one facing in the country as well. Samuel's a graduate of our master's program in American Indian Studies, and doing great work in language issues with this pueblo. I gave a talk at the Herd last week, and I talked about the issue of the use of stereotypes and the word redskin, and how it was used to justify manifest destiny and genocide committed against Indian peoples. And there was only several Native people in the audience, and one happened to be from Red Mountain, where that team that Amanda referred to is. And she came up to me afterwards and said, I think if the students knew about this issue, they would rethink it. She said, I never knew that name had that negative connotations, and it was so deeply rooted in the racist fabric of this country. And so it's just a matter of educating our own people oftentimes. And several years ago, when I was chair of the Board of Trustees of Pawnee Nation College, we had a proposal to accept the name Pawnee Scouts for the team name for our basketball team there at the college. And we on the trustees, we talked about it, And we said, no, we don't want any personification of names to be used as a mascot, you know. So when we said, well, maybe the Bobcats would do. So people walk around going, wow, fierce Bobcat. Kind of making fun like that. Someone's husband in this room would do that. My sister Donna is here from Colony also. President Norman and DC like that. So nice to see you all here.
Good evening. I want to thank all of you for being panelists. I really appreciate your words and you all being here. Thank you for making this film. This question is for Amanda. So I'm just kind of wondering what's next in the ways of, I mean, I do see, you know, of course, the public protests, but is there any way legally that you and others are following up, say, by way of policy? My question is like, what are other means with teeth, you know, that are fighting this?
Well, I know that there are some local efforts in DC. There are, I mentioned the stadium issue, you know, that continues to put pressure on the team, preventing them from, you know, moving economically and politically. And then also there's Ian and Josh who are in the documentary. Their the fan base, they're continuing to do what they're doing locally with the fan base. And I noticed this last time that the Washington team came to Phoenix, there was a group of fans who wore burgundy and yellow or gold, and they came up and they just had no name on their shirts, and they said, we're fans, we're here for the game, but we stand with you guys, and we chose not to wear it. And so I think at this point, because the fan base is at an all-time low, like there's not a whole lot of attendance, I think that's really where we should go at this point, is to try to get them to move, because ultimately the economic, you know, that, you know, they hold economic power. And so we started this sort of new trend where we're asking fans to turn their jerseys inside out and film it. And we got one guy to do that at a couple of protests, but we didn't film the first one. And it was really popular. And so I think that, you know, I don't know, people are into challenges these days, you know, do some sort of challenge or something. But I really think that that's an area that we should go for at this point. Legally, right now, it's really hard to go back through the trademark board because of the Supreme Court ruling. So that's kind of not, you know, it's kind of done. But there's always a way, you know, there's always a way. So we're not done. We'll find something else, some other avenue. So we just continue to put pressure on them.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate you on this film. As a non-native person who teaches Native American politics and history, this would come in very handy in teaching non-native students. So I'd like to figure out how I can get a hold of that. One of the things in the film that really struck me was the exploitation of the Dina code talkers, the elders, by the team. And it made me think, particularly as a scholar mostly of the presidency, Donald Trump invited the code talkers to the White House. Many of us saw that as they stood underneath the picture of Andrew Jackson, and then he went off on Elizabeth Warren. How does that type of event, coming from the top levels of our national government, fit in with this politics of imagery and symbolism? Thank you.
We're going to do maybe the last one.
Okay, so my question is, or my statement right now is, good movie, and I hope it gets into every single curriculum with the indigenous base at a high school level. I really hope that happens. And I wanted to ask you, what can we do to further help support this film, and where do you plan on taking it next? And also incorporating it into those curriculums that are mainly native based, right? Because, you know, educating our own people is necessary at this time in these stages of of where we're at with advocacy and where we're at with, you know, getting our voices out there. So I just wanted to ask you guys that and also make that statement.
So going back to the first question, as far as the political climate, we're never in a good political climate, you know. It's a mess, it's always been a mess, you know. If it's not Elizabeth Warren jokes, it's, you know, it's something, you know, and it's like, I think this gives us an opportunity now to really talk about some of those issues and, you know, using our people, and this is exactly what Dan Snyder has done, is use our people to further their agenda, you know, bringing in Native people, paying people to kind of be their support, their token, which is what Trump is doing, you know, which is what the Kansas City Chiefs are doing, you know, which is what I think now even the Cleveland Indians are doing now, you know, and they're still called the Indians. Yeah, they may have gotten rid of Wahoo, but they're still called the Indians. So I'm not going to call it a victory, you know. And so there's always something. And, you know, people are like, oh, well, things are just all, you know, crazy right now. Well, it's always been crazy. And with Elizabeth Warren, I think that we're just going to keep, it's going to get worse, you know, because she's running for president, and it's the, you know, it's just going to, we're going to keep having these conversations over and over again about ancestry, the jokes, and hopefully this will give us some sort of segue to address this on a national level.
So we're kind of, so basically with the film, you get about 2 years before you can kind of do the film circuit, film festival circuit. And so we're kind of wrapping that up. I haven't really applied for any lately, so it was kind of on a university and film circuit, but our contract actually is probably going to be running up with Media Education Foundation in June, but they've been really great to us, and so I think we're going to probably stick with them, but we're trying to figure out ways to get it more outside of kind of their university box. And I think, I'd love to get it on Netflix or make it more accessible, but one of the things that we're also kind of playing around with is we have a writer in our contract where essentially like any country can like stream it for free, and the nice part is they didn't really know they didn't have a definition of Indian country, so I think I can make up that definition of Indian country for them. So I think, you know, for conferences like this, there's no screening fee and things like that, and so I think I'm hopefully finishing the PhD soon, and then I'm like gonna maybe go back into kind of figure out ways, and we're also working on building curriculum with it as well. But I think that's kind of been my focus in school right now, but we really want to get it out there in Native communities because I think there's so many people, you know, I grew up, it's like embarrassing to admit, but I grew up a Fighting Sioux fan until I was like 12 because I wanted to play in the NHL, and they were sending people to the NHL, and it's something that I had to like undo and unthink a lot. And you know, like Amanda said, like, we're trained these things as Native people too. That doesn't give us a free pass, and so I think I really want to get it into anywhere I possibly can, and I think whether that's like we do try to do a screening tour on like all tribal colleges or whatever, but I think we're open to anything and whatever, and I think if you really want to set up a screening somewhere, just like reach out to me and we can do that. So, are we done? Cool, so I guess I just want to say like thank you for everybody for coming out today. We'll probably be kind of in and out, so I guess if anybody wants to talk or anything too, that's great. And like I said, this was a really great turnout tonight, so thank you for everybody for coming.